Hello, everybody, and welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around fantasy Premier League. My name's Suj.
And my name is James.
And in a people's poll episode where there was no poll, basically, this is the topic of the moment for a lot of football fans, James. We are talking about...
I put a poll out on Sunday.
Yeah.
In fact, it had a lot more votes than it normally does.
We are talking about, James.
The completed takeover of Newcastle United Football Club, which has been in the making for around about 18 months. Looked like it died several times, and then just very suddenly last week, bang, it's back on and it's done.
Yeah,
in the space of about 24 hours, basically.
The timescales are very interesting in terms of how quickly it did eventually get done. So, of course, we are going to look into it in this episode, and I guess, kind of 18 months on from when it was originally touted, we did and recorded an episode and talked about the potential takeover and what it could mean. I don't feel like a lot's changed from that episode back then, other than now. It basically is reality as opposed to a pipe dream. And everything that we discussed back then is wholly relevant right now.
To tell you how far this goes back, Series 3, Episode 41 of Planet FPL was titled The Takeover of Newcastle United. It was about a month after COVID had dropped, and we were fighting to carry on talking about football, basically, in any way. And we also did a Patreon podcast last year about the subject as well. But there is a lot to unpack, not least in terms of who these people are. Because it's one of the things that's been holding the deal back for so long is, well, who is actually buying Newcastle United Football Club?
Yeah, I mean, so there are three key parties involved, but the major shareholder who now own 80% of Newcastle United is the Public Investment Fund from Saudi Arabia. A lot of governments have excess cash, not just the Saudi Arabians. A lot of countries have these public investment funds where they collect loads and loads of tax dollars. They can't leave it sitting in a bank account. So they invest it to help grow. The profits and proceeds they make go back to the country that owns the investment fund. I know a friend of mine who works for the Canadian one, for example, based out of London. And it's particularly large. I mean, it's in the billions, the size of that fund, but not anywhere near the size of the Saudi Arabian public investment fund. So you might hear PIF bandied about a bit. So it's basically is the Saudi Arabian government who have a fund that is for not just foreign, but domestic and foreign investments. Alongside Reuben Brothers, who I know limited amount about, but are brokers in the deal.
They're not Jamie short of cash, let me tell you.
Yeah, Jamie and what's his brother's name? Paul? Jamie?
Oh my God, I've forgotten. I just noticed the Reuben Brothers.
And of course, Amanda Staveley, who is the face of the takeover in so many ways, is also a 10% shareholder now of Newcastle United. And she is quite, one of her previous historical, her background is in the Middle East and helping Middle Eastern businesses enter the West and get funding vice versa. She has a history and a legacy with Middle Eastern countries, organizations, wealthy individuals.
And football. I didn't know this till the last week, but she played a major role in the Manchester City takeover.
Correct.
Incredible.
Yep.
So she obviously knows a lot of people out there, which is, I guess, why she's being contacted to be a part of it. I mean, I don't know who started the contact here in terms of whether it was from Amanda Staveley and the Reuben Brothers to seek the funding. I mean, the Reuben Brothers don't need the funding. The Reuben Brothers could have bought Newcastle United themselves with actually the amount of money. I think they're about 20 billion worth. That's incredible. Them guys are near the Man City level of in terms of actual financials. So it does make you wonder, did they even need the PIF money? Who, I mean, their finances are, I mean, it's in a different stratosphere, isn't it? Estimated at somewhere around about between £300 billion and $500 billion or something. The sort of money you can't equate to. 10 times Man City, basically.
Correct. Yeah. And that fund, I mean, it's headed by the Crown Prince bin Salman, who has a reputation for, well, it's a dodgy reputation, let's say. Although he is trying to improve both his personal reputation and the reputation of Saudi Arabia overseas, and has been on this mission for quite some time. So the investment fund originally, when it was first started, used to focus primarily on local investments within Saudi Arabian walls. I guess that's also primarily because whether or not they were and weren't allowed to move the money overseas, but more recently have invested in so many other growing startups, the likes of Uber and Tesla and all sorts of companies like that. So football is not the only space that they are investing in outside of Saudi Arabia, but they are investing in tech startups and other cool places to be involved with to kind of broaden the horizons of Saudi Arabia and improve the image overseas.
I read that he's got about 34 brothers and about 27 sisters.
No comment, no understanding of, or what have you. But yeah, he is one of many brothers, and there was always going to be a discussion about who would take over from his father as the Crown Prince. He is the one that has stepped up. There's a lot of history about him online, and I just encourage people to have a look on YouTube. I think he studied law in Riyadh and was regarded as his dad's favorite, and which is potentially why he's ended up being the one that's taken over.
Essentially, he's the chosen one.
Yep.
Basically, from all these kids. I'm not a joke when I put them numbers together. I think he is one of about 50 to 60 siblings or so. It's incredible. I mean, his dad must have liked a night out. I'm guessing. I don't know. We have to talk about some of the stuff behind it, though. The kind of well-known killing of the journalist whose name escapes me. Suj.
Jamal Khashoggi.
Thank you. I always forget it. So sorry.
Was murdered, unfortunately, at an embassy. There's so much around why this deal didn't happen originally, why it wouldn't go through. And the Premier League, I think I would urge people to listen to Business of Sport podcast from The Athletic, which is quite good and breaks a lot of stuff down. But the Premier League essentially blocked the takeover originally, stating that the guys from the Public Investment Fund would not pass the directors and owners test, fit and proper persons test, and so on and so on and so on. There was always a little bit of hypocrisy leveled at them because of that and what was going on with other owners, potentially at other clubs and so on, and why they weren't being given a fair crack at it. What has happened in the last week, I think, very clearly shows that it was bullshit.
Oh yeah, this was all about piracy, which in fairness, in correspondent week is exactly what Simon Bibby, our Newcastle correspondent, FPL Football, was absolutely adamant. This is just about piracy. Is the reason for the takeover is getting blocked. So it seems that one of the original factors that the Premier League were given, because if you remember, if you go back sort of 15 months or so here, the PIF fund originally, Amanda Staveley and the partners, they all pulled out the deal because the Premier League weren't basically saying yes, they weren't saying no. They were sitting there on their hands just waiting for it to kind of fall apart, and waited for the deal, which was obviously kind of, when you enter a negotiation for something like this, you have a certain amount of time to buy the club, which was obviously entered into with Mike Ashley, the current chairman of Newcastle. That expired, then they pulled out because the agreement was essentially off the table. Not that Ashley was an agent on it, because obviously he's been sitting there trying to push it through as well, in fairness.
Of course, he's been wanting to sell for ages.
But one of the main reasons at the time was it was believed that the Premier League, removed the piracy for a moment, wanted evidence that the Public Investment Fund were not being basically run by the Saudi Arabian government. Now, they're now saying they're happy with that, but they weren't happy with that 18 months ago. Well, that's a nonsense, isn't it?
Well, how can the Public Investment Fund of a country not have any influence, on what's happening, especially when it's bin Salman who's the chair?
Well, exactly. It's a nonsense.
It's like bullshit. It's no different to when Donald Trump became president of America. He had to divulge all his interests in his businesses to his kids. Like they had to run it, or it didn't have to be to his kids. I guess he could have passed over to someone else, but you can't run your private business and be the president of a country. It was bullshit that he divulged his interests. Like he was still calling the shots and doing what he was doing, but you can't. It's impossible. You're trying to genuinely say that you're going to give over the keys and have no control or influence. It's not going to happen. It's an unrealistic expectation.
To answer the question, in any case, why would the Premier League be concerned if Newcastle United was being run by a government? Why would that actually be a concern?
I'm not sure.
I think it probably relates back to a lot of Saudi Arabia's ethical issues around human rights, LGBT, the way women are treated, etc.
Potentially so. But then individuals can have checkered past and issues with human rights and so on and so on, as much as a country can. Whether it's a country or an individual or an organization, I don't think makes difference. It should be the same test for human rights and so on for everybody. I think the reality of the situation, we can talk about human rights and Khashoggi, is that the piracy issue was much more of a big deal, and the timing is just so
which is actually ridiculous when you say that.
So stupid, because and many won't know, but so beIN Sports is a Qatari-owned company and are the rights holders for the Premier League across the Middle East. They pay the Premier League a lot of money to be the sole distributor of Premier League football in that region.
You might have heard the term MENA, Middle East and North Africa.
North Africa, MENA. Now, the Saudis and the Qataris have been having beef for a little while, James, talking about 4 years or so, 4 and a bit years. It's not just related to football rights. I mean, countries don't go to war over that. But they've been poking the needle at each other in various different things. There was the war in Yemen, and Saudi had an influence in that, and so on and so on. But the beIN Sports issue was that Saudi Arabia blocked beIN Sports from being distributed, or broadcast is the right word, in Saudi Arabia. They had another channel, BIQ or something.
No, not only did they block beIN Sports, they took the piss. They called it BQ out or something.
It was just like
took the piss.
Exactly that. So now beIN Sports are obviously up in arms with the Premier League, saying, "Come on, you can't sell us the rights, and then this country are blocking us from executing our rights of broadcasting in there." And yet you're then going to let them take over a Premier League football club. That's a kick in the balls and a slap in the face at the same time. Thank you very much. You take our money, but not help us in this situation. So strangely, not strangely, but surprisingly, Saudi Arabia and Qatar seem to now be friends or smoothing things over. They lift the block on beIN Sports being broadcast in Saudi Arabia. And a day later,
the deal's done.
Suddenly they buy Newcastle United. Don't tell me that timeline's not sus.
But of course it is. I mean, the only thing is we're obviously not privy to know that perhaps the talks, perhaps they've been aware for a month, for example, that Qatar and Saudi Arabia were about to strike a deal, for example. But yes, of course, it just makes everybody think, actually, this wasn't about anything to do with human rights, the way Saudi Arabia is run. It was to do with the fact that a major contractor for the Premier League TV rights, the biggest outside of the UK worldwide, was being denied access to one of the countries it was paying to show the rights in. And had they pulled the plug, which they would have been within right to, or to actually ask for compensation from the Premier League, we'd be talking a lot of money here. A lot of money, which the Premier League would not have been able to afford, basically. Well, it would have been able to afford it.
They would have been able to afford it, but listen, they're type bastards. They're giving nothing back. Yeah.
Particularly knowing that Saudi Arabia were quite happy to go, well, we've got be out queue. We'll just keep showing everything privately, and the Premier League's getting no money. So, yeah, it was all along basically a bit of a ruse to deal with this TV problem. Is what stopped it. They can go down the line all they want, the Premier League, in my opinion, of, oh yeah, we needed substantial proof that the private investment fund is not part of the Saudi government. What it is.
Yeah, it still is. Nothing's changed.
No.
Nothing's changed at all.
So Newcastle United are now owned by a state.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's our opinion anyway.
In
spite of all the official word to the contrary.
So are Man City. I mean, they're not owned by Abu Dhabi, but he's one of the royal family. PSG are owned by the state of Qatar. It's happening slowly and surely, you know.
What, Tottenham owned by the state of Haringey Borough?
I think Joe Lewis lives in Bermuda, doesn't he? Somewhere along those lines.
Joe Lewis is a tax dodger. Roman Abramovich has got dirty money. Let's not. It's worth saying it's not just protection. Not all just Newcastle United. The money in football and in our league has been dirty for a very, very long time. Basically, the richer it is, the more dirty it is. Seems to be the way.
Yeah. So I guess it leads on to the question then, where do we stand on it? In terms of human rights issues, these are not new. These are issues that have existed in the region for a long time. It's not like the Saudi Arabians suddenly developed anti-homosexual or that kind of thing laws in the last 20 years or 30 years. It's been that way for hundreds of years, that kind of thing. So not much of what they have done is new. There have been some difficult situations like the intervention in Yemen, the Jamal Khashoggi situation, where he's clearly been murdered for being a dissident and speaking against the regime. But again, they're not isolated. Other countries and other situations have risen as well. So it's a very, very difficult one to have a non-hypocritical opinion. Basically, consistency is the issue here for me. That we have to treat everything with some level of consistency and use the same measure of standard against everyone.
One of the things I said on my stream, and I think this applies for some people who've already been listening to this game, but you haven't said about this yet. It's almost impossible for a neutral to make comment on this whole situation without upsetting someone.
Yeah.
Almost every statement is either going to offend Newcastle, it's going to offend Saudi Arabia, it's going to offend the neutral who doesn't want these people, everybody. Almost every comment is going to offend someone in some way. The reality is, I think most of us could look at it and go, we would rather these people were not taking over Newcastle United Football Club. Not because of they're a threat from a financial, we're just not comfortable with it. It doesn't feel right, is the reality.
Yeah, I think, I suppose I'm breaking my thought into kind of two areas. So the first question is around them specifically, but then the wider, should politics and sport mix? Should you have politics and sport mixing?
Always has, hasn't it?
Like and I think it's fine. People are humans. Sports players are humans. You look at the situation with the likes of Colin Kaepernick and what we're doing now, kneeling before games, which is still going on. And I just think, I look at it and I'm like, I'm glad it's still like not lost its momentum and people are still willing to make a political statement. Marcus Rashford's getting involved in politics and helping kids eat, right? I think it's perfectly fine for people to have a political opinion and voice it. And whether you're a sports person or not shouldn't make a difference on whether or not you're allowed to voice a political opinion. So I don't think there's an issue with sport and politics mixing a little bit, particularly.
You know what people will say though, right? Instantly in reaction to that will be, you can't compare taking the knee to some of the things that have gone in Saudi Arabia, right?
Okay.
It can't. It's not logical to, but unfortunately you have to draw a line somewhere to make some sort of comparison, like you're saying, in terms of, politics is a big part in football. Like I've already said, dirty money, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, has been a big part of English football growing year on year, and it's probably going to get a lot dirtier over the next decade, by the way, unfortunately. I think that's the point. So when people compare to, say, Abramovich's money, right? So a lot of people will say Abramovich's money is dirty in terms of how he got his money, etc. Agreed. Then some people might turn around and go, yeah, well, Roman Abramovich didn't potentially order the killing of someone, and that's so where's the line? Where's the line? True. Salman has taken responsibility. he said it was a major error that the journalist died. And he said that he didn't order it, but he basically has admitted that he was basically admitted that he was connected to what happened.
Listen, they spent the first 3 or 4 days after it happened denying all knowledge and disappearing on saying there's nothing to do with them and they don't know where he is. And then suddenly it emerges that they did. It's all bullshit. But I suppose you can go down the rabbit hole of what is and isn't acceptable and set different standards. So Roman Abramovich didn't kill anyone, but his money came from a period in the late 90s, 2000s, where all of the raw materials and natural resources in Russia were being looted by private individuals. And you've got hundreds of millions of people in that country now living on the breadline and not leading, not potentially living lives that they could with infrastructure they could, had that money and profits been funneled back into the country through the tax system and whatever, right? So my point is that you can go down so many rabbit holes here. Where do you? And I think we shouldn't necessarily try and create arbitrary different lines and different rules for different people. We set one rule, but we use sports for the positive. Like I really struggle with.
I get that, and there is a belief that change is trying to happen in Saudi Arabia. We shouldn't say this is Saudi Arabia, that's them forever. There does seem to be an intention to change, but I wonder if that is just purely a term that we hear a lot, sport washing. So we think, this is okay because the money is now being invested in sport and popular culture of things that we like.
I'm skeptical in my own idealistic belief of we can let politics and sport mix. Let's not set arbitrary rules for one person and another, and let's bring everyone together, but then reinforce the message to them that this is not acceptable and this is the standards that you need to set, and try and use sport to make that change happen. You could apply the same philosophy to racism in Eastern European football that we've seen as well. Like, don't kick them out of football, but let's teach them what's right. And that's my idealistic view. And I'm skeptical about my own idealistic view because I think people will say that, the Premier League and other people will say that, knowing that actually just want to get the money in and it's fine and let them do what they want to do, because we're not really going to ever affect any meaningful change. That's my concern. And that's why I have to be skeptical of my own wish, that is we can use sport to drive that positive change.
And it's worth saying as well, this country has been quite an influence in terms of Saudi Arabia, right? We do arms trades with them and stuff, right?
Yeah.
We're basically in bed with them in terms of our government and stuff. So if you voted a certain way, you're part responsible. If you really want to go down that rabbit hole and stuff. I mean, I wonder how people feel about the fact that, say, Anthony Joshua fought in Saudi Arabia when he had the Ruiz rematch. Why did he fight there? Money. Why the WWE from America now taking one of their biggest events? They go and play in the Prince Abdullah Stadium in Saudi Arabia. Let's make sure all their biggest stars, because that's their biggest money maker now, is going and selling their event in Saudi Arabia. Paris Saint-Germain, who are obviously part owned by Qatar, right? They're taking a team in January to play in Saudi Arabia, a mix of Saudi Arabia's two biggest clubs. Everyone's at it. Yeah. Everyone's at it for the money, and all want a piece of the pie. I mean, no bigger example than the fact that the World Cup is being in Qatar next year.
Yeah,
I've said this before. I would have no problem if the FA and the English football team said, we're not going to play in that tournament. And that would be a major step. It's not going to happen. Everyone's going to go, and when the tournament starts, everyone's going to enjoy it and forget that it's the majority of people are not going to sit there through the 65 odd games at the World Cup, however many there are, and for all of it, just go, I'm not doing this because it's in Qatar. I'm sure some people will have the stance point and go, I'm not going to watch the World Cup because it's in Qatar. The reality is, the majority of the world in just over 12 months' time is going to have their whole eyes on what's happening in that region of the world.
Yeah.
So we're all part responsible.
Yeah, agreed. And this is where it gets become difficult to know where you can and can't draw the lines. Now, the reality is it's done. The deal is done. Amanda Staveley is now starting to have an influence. I hear from what I saw on Sky Sports yesterday that she was at the training ground, met Steve Bruce. I think most.
Did you see the comments that I think it was the Daily Mirror had a headline of Steve Bruce survives first day at training. They made it sound like Squid Games, mate.
Yeah. But we all know he's not the long-term future of the club, and so
he'll be gone. Steve Bruce might be gone by the time we actually release this podcast. Indeed. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. So what then does happen in the future? Now, one of the questions that people have asked and want to know the answer to is how much money these guys got, which we know is like 300 billion in the fund, but they can't spend 300 billion. But what can they spend in the upcoming transfer window closed bracket windows? January is never the best time to be throwing a lot of money around. But they are sitting second bottom of the league. They haven't won a game yet, so they might need to do a little something.
Don't worry, they're playing my team on Sunday, so you put them 3 points on the board now, I think. But yeah, they haven't lost a lot of money in the previous 3 years, and as a result, they actually can spend a little bit of money in the next. Yeah, this is part of the irony, is because of Mike Ashley basically. His goal every year being, right, Newcastle stay up and we get the television money, is basically the limit of what they've been for the last.
Don't lose any money first.
Basically, certainly what they've been for the last probably 6 to 7 years or so, and many Newcastle fans would argue all of it. But I'd argue, 2012 they nearly qualified for the Champions League and stuff. But for the majority of the years, that's been it. Survive, take the money, go again. Don't spend the money. It means Newcastle have money in the bank, and it means that the owners coming into the football club can spend more than actually many other clubs who would be restricted under financial fair play. I think Kieran Maguire from the Price of Football was extremely well in the know in terms of how FFP works and stuff, has estimated that they've probably got around about 190 million that they could probably just blow now.
Yeah, exactly that.
But there's buts. There's buts. The buts is we have to consider that what's Harry Kane's worth, for example, just an example. Let's say they were going to offer the money that Man City wouldn't in the summer. And they went, right, we'll buy Harry Kane. There's your 150 million. Right. So they bought one brilliant centre forward, but now they've only got 40 million left. It's going to be more difficult than it sounds. It sounds like a lot of money. Now, what they could do to obviously generate a lot more money is endorsements and sponsorship money. The Premier League, I believe, since Mike Ashley took over, the revenue in the Premier League has grown by around about 160%. Newcastle's revenue since Mike Ashley took over has grown 1%. That tells me there are a lot of endorsement and sponsorship stuff that's available to Newcastle. Whether Newcastle United fans like it or not, or you've got your football club back and St James's Park and all that, well, it's probably not going to be St James's Park in the long term, is it? It's probably going to be the Al Rayyan Saudi Arabia Stadium or something. Is the reality. And a little bit like City moved into basically the Etihad,
City
right?
of Manchester Stadium.
Well, no, it was City of Manchester. You're quite right. Then it became the Etihad. I feel like the Etihad deal was there before the Sheikhs got the club for some reason. I might have that wrong. But there's loads of sponsorship opportunities out there, of course. Shirt. I mean, branding around the stadium, advertising, hoardings. The stadium's an obvious one. Training ground. There's loads of ways that they can manipulate to get extra money into the football club, which suddenly could mean, I think it's probably reasonable to suggest that if they get all that right, and Amanda Staveley does seem like a very savvy young woman, and so do the Reuben brothers, and they're going to be working hard within the football club, I don't think it's an unfair estimate to say that Newcastle could probably spend in the region of 500 million in the next 24 months or so.
Yeah. The 190 million that Maguire, Kevin. Why am I blank?
Kieran Maguire.
Kieran.
Yeah.
I was like, blanking on his first name. Kieran Maguire has touted around is because over a 3-year window, the maximum losses you're allowed to sustain from kind of football activity, not including investment and stuff, is 100 million pounds. You can't lose more than 100 million. And they haven't. They've actually made a 38 million pound profit in that period. So 138 million is what is available to them if they were to make no changes to their finances, that 100 million loss plus the 38 million pound profit. Now, you don't want to spank a loss straight away, but that's what they could without then breaching future FFP. And on top of that, they've made investments into their youth system, which then I think if you invest in your stadium or youth system, you get like a credit against losses that you're allowed to spend as well, which is another 50 million pounds.
Any money that's spent on stadium, training ground, youth development doesn't normally come out your FFP budget.
Yeah, you get another 50 million whacked on top of that. So that's where the 190 comes from that they're allowed to spend. And you're quite right, James. They can easily bump up their revenues from match days, from sponsorship. I think some Geordies might actually buy some merch now because many wouldn't buy anything to just line his pockets. And I think they'll have a little bump from that kind of stuff as well. And they'll be able to accumulate more losses over a 3-year period. So I think your 500 million is probably a fair stab as what we could see, not in the first window, but over 3 windows, maybe 3 or 4 windows.
What Newcastle must do is learn lessons. If we're kind of really moving on to kind of football future here, is learn lessons from what other clubs have done right and other clubs have done wrong. So the question I keep getting is, right, James, so how long do you think before Newcastle qualify for the Champions League? The major difference between now and 2008, when City got taken over on deadline day in 2008, is there's basically a big bridge to cross before you get to the end of it. And that bridge is the kind of teams between 5th and 9th are far more competitive than they were back in 2008. The Arsenals, Tottenhams, West Hams, Villas, Everton, Leicester, Leeds going to be pushing forward, right? These clubs have all got similar kind of goal. They all want to be playing European football as well. In 2008, there was a big 4, of which really Liverpool hadn't won the league for nearly 20 years. And bar, ironically, that the 2008-9 season didn't really come that close. United had a bit of a wobble and they gave United a little bit of a scare. But then in 9-10, Liverpool had a disastrous season based on the previous year and ended up finishing 7th. And it opened the door because that was the top 4 like nearly every year, bar Everton in 2005. Whereas obviously in the last few years, we've had Arsenal dropped out of that top 4. Arsenal Tottenham have obviously were in for sort of 3-4 years in a row. We've had Chelsea in, out. United have obviously spent a few years out of it as well. So that whole pool area is a lot more competitive. Like the likes of Tottenham and Arsenal, they're not in a great situation at the moment, but they're not going to go silently into the night. They need that Champions League revenue and they're going to make their own push again at certain points. So the actual getting to 4th is far more difficult. Far more difficult. There was no West Ham United kind of threatening to. The irony was that actually when City did get close, was also it was perfect timing for Tottenham with a great group of young players who Tottenham hadn't spent a lot of money on. They were kind of the anti to City at the time and managed to beat them off. But obviously it was inevitable that the next year City got in and then the next year they won the title. I think all these things will happen for Newcastle. I just think it might take a lot longer. And the danger that's been highlighted is the case scenario of Everton, which I don't think really until we spoke to Sean at Spirit Blues in the summer, we quite realised that there was really a problem at Everton. And the problem is Everton has spent a lot of money over the last 3 or 4 years. And basically, with the money they spent, they needed to go and make Champions League revenue. Now, they've got nowhere near it.
No.
And now they're obviously making cutbacks. And that's the small danger here for Newcastle. Because you're right to say they can have the 100 million, and we say a danger, it's all relative to their current problems, right? Things aren't going to get worse for Newcastle. They can make that kind of 100 million rolling loss for 3 years. But once you get to sort of year 4, 5 of the project, if you're not hitting the Champions League football, even with all the money they've got, if FFP does still exist, they'll have to do what Everton have done.
Yep.
And then there's no guarantee from there that you go back, that they get the hump and go, well, what's this? 5 years in, and we're having to imagine them having to make cutbacks. We've got £300 billion in the bank, and we've got to sell footballers.
Yeah,
it's a financial fair play. Now, there's a lot of people that think, and myself included, actually, that financial fair play is probably going to go to the wayside, and this probably won't matter, and it'll probably be open water again, and everybody can go mad. And if they can, then it's not unreasonable to think that Newcastle United will go and spend billions in one transfer window, right? I mean, they can do what they like. There is no limit to them financially. The only limit on them is if they are limited by what they can spend. So I think it's going to be interesting to see the journey that they go on. It's not a guarantee. I don't think it's a guarantee.
But it's not. I tell you why. Because football is 11 against 11. 11 men against 11 men. On any given day, anyone can beat anyone. Like spending more money doesn't guarantee. I mean, the correlation between wage bill and league position generally has been going on for years and years. Man United are probably the anomaly that pay more and haven't really delivered over the years, but they have more recently. But it's still not a guarantee of success. You're right. It just kind of puts you in that conversation consistently.
In an odd way, the greater guarantee for Newcastle is if they take a bit more time on it. So if they actually do it sensibly all the way through. So, I mean, in my mind now, that would be targeting young players who have resale value, because the players that they want to buy now are not necessarily the players that they're going to want when they actually win a Premier League. So you have to buy players that are going to have resale value. So I think of people like, if they want to start pillaring people out the bottom half of the league, people like, just examples, Ismail Assar at Watford, Dwight McNeil at Burnley, who their age profile and stuff is that, okay, if they go in there for 3 years and then they sell them on, they'll probably get their money back. And I think that's quite important to their thinking at the moment. So I think they need to attack a certain tier of signing. There's no point just going for Haaland and stuff like that.
No.
I mean, they can afford it.
Yeah.
And it might be that in his case, he'd go, well, I'm going to be here for 10 years. I wouldn't say that's impossible, but there would be no point in, say, I don't know, let's just say Messi was going to walk out of PSG tomorrow. There would be no point Lionel Messi going to Newcastle.
No.
He's not going to win anything.
No.
Even Lionel Messi. It's not going to happen overnight like that. So I think even if they kind of work out a 10-year rolling plan, rather than trying to hit it really hard in 3-4 years, they'll actually be more successful doing it a bit more slowly, because then they'll stay within the limits and they will just grow naturally. And it will just be like an upward trajectory like it's been for City. But even City had problems, right? People that they paid big salaries to, people like Adebayor and stuff, Joe, Robinho, who they really struggled to get off the books. But then City didn't quite have the same FFP restrictions that Newcastle might have. And I think that's probably the next story of what happens to Newcastle is what's going to happen with FFP. Because obviously it's kind of been, there's a leniency to it because of what's happened with COVID. Plus, there's a lot of people who want to attack it, obviously off the back of Manchester City. We spoke about this at the time. If they got the Champions League ban overturned, we thought it would effectively mean that FFP was dead because City went and broke the rules. There's ways around it, right? I read a story that one player in the Championship, he had a certain bonus or so on a certain number of goals or something, and the club couldn't afford to pay it. So they, to him, because it would break certain rules in terms of playing staff, so they employed his mother as a scout to pay him the rest. There's always a way round, and obviously exactly that. Yeah.
For the fans, they must be happy. Like for me, if I was a Geordie fan, I'd feel a few things. Firstly,
go on.
Secure. Like, you know, that we've had takeover talk before, like the Icelandic guys and what have you, but it was never secure. These guys got so much money that you could stomach 2 or 3 bad years and still find a way to get out of it. So I feel like they've got legacy, long-term money, not quick. If this doesn't work, we could find ourselves in a Derby situation money. So I'd feel a lot more secure that now it's a put your feet up for a little while, a long-term project to watch unfold rather than fighting short-term all the time. What's going to happen this season? 17th, great. What's going to happen this season? 16th, great. So I think they can start looking at it from that kind of point of view and be excited, because there's no doubt about it. This is now, it's like waking up and having a club that's in the same conversations, not now, but will be, as United, City, PSG, Barcelona, and so on. You are now at that level. I think for all my life, I was trying to think about it on the way in, James. I've driven used cars generally, and decent ones, not bad ones, but always picked up a used car well, throughout the years. Sometimes it's been a bit shit and not worked particularly well. And sometimes they've done me well and served me well for a couple of years. But they've always been a half decent second-hand car. This is waking up in the morning. There's a fucking tasty Porsche in the fucking driveway, brand spankers new. And it's fine. That's what they've got.
But when you put the key in, will it turn?
It will. It will turn and it will drive for a while. And you might not be able to drive a Porsche, so you might fuck it up after 2 or 3 years of revving it too much. But they've literally woken up.
The queues at the petrol station might be too long to get
That's
fuel.
also true right now. They've woken up with an elite football club from a financial standpoint point of view. It's going to end up competing with the biggest clubs in the world. That's what they have now.
Positives of the ownership for Newcastle just outside of football. Anybody, and I can't comment on this personally, I don't know, but everybody who seems to have lived in the East End of Manchester says that the kind of area has been regenerated by the owners of Manchester City. And there are similar promises of regenerating the city of Newcastle, which is one of the best cities in the UK. Like, if you've never got drunk in Newcastle, that's something you need to do. Even if you don't remember it afterwards. Oh, Newcastle's unlike any other city I've been in. It's absolutely nuts. And the people up there are brilliant, right? I think most of us would look at it and go, if there was a club that you'd say, give them all the money and have the kind of fantasy ride, a lot of us would say them, I think. So there isn't an animosity to Newcastle.
Not at all.
Particularly. To kind of this is where it's contradiction again, because a lot of people will say, well, the money they want to invest in the city is just adding to the whole sport washing idea. You have to kind of flip every statement to kind of show both sides of the story. It's the same as when you say Newcastle fans will tell you they've suffered for the last 14 years. And someone in the background is obviously going to go, well, have you suffered like Bury? Or are you suffering like Oldham Athletic or like Macclesfield Town have? No, of course they haven't. But relative to their football club and how they feel about their football club, they've had fuck all for 14 years. They never even had a cup semi-final. Never mind a cup final. The club obviously hasn't won a trophy for over 50 years. And the inevitability is now that at some stage that will happen. I think Newcastle United fans have the right to feel conflicted, because I would imagine that the majority of them are uncomfortable with where the money is coming from. But they shouldn't be uncomfortable with the fact that they support their football team and want to have some pride in their football team. I think the best advice I could give Newcastle fans would be exactly that. Be a fan of your football team. You don't have to, when you go and support your football team on a Saturday or whatever day of the week it is these days, you don't have to support everything about your club. I would prefer Tottenham to have different owners at the moment, but I don't go to the game and not support my football team because I'd like a different owner.
Correct.
And I think
it's no different to Mike Ashley.
I think
they support their team without
Newcastle fans will learn to get the battering of where the money's come from in the same way Man City fans have learned to deal with it, in the same way Chelsea fans have learned to deal with it, and they kind of shrug it off. And I'm not saying Newcastle fans should just shrug it off. They should concentrate on supporting their team. I've heard a lot of people say in the last week, if that was my club, I'd stop supporting my team. I can tell you factually, if it was my club, there is no way I would stop supporting my team, because I can't. I am too emotionally attached. And particularly in a region like Newcastle, the one club city, etc., 95% of them fans will feel exactly like that. I am sure there are some Newcastle fans out there who are going to go, that's not for me. But the majority will. And I don't think they should be criticised for wanting to see the best for their football team, essentially. And go and support your team. Go and enjoy the ride. All I'd probably say is don't go waving like Saudi Arabian flags and dressing up to look like a Saudi Arabian and stuff like that. Go and wear your black and white shirt and go and support the team.
Well said and well wrapped up, James. There we go. There's a People's Poll rundown on Newcastle. And as James did say, the story will continue to unfold, especially when we get to January, when the transfer window, the supermarket opens, James, and we'll see what state Newcastle are in there and where they are in the league.
SkyFF footballers on Clash of Correspondence next Thursday as well. So we'll be getting his opinion as well.
Listeners, wherever you are listening to the podcast, make sure you subscribe because you'll get notified as soon as that episode goes live. We're back at you this week with more content. Sky Fantasy Football tomorrow. We will have Clash of the Correspondence on Thursday. Burnley, Man City. and a Ask James live stream on Friday, as well as a bunch of Patreon pods. The first of which today will look back at Mike Ashley's Newcastle reign. So if you're interested in more content, head over to patreon.com/Planet FPL. Other than that, just leaves me to say, stay safe. Good luck, the Geordies. Ciao for now.
Thanks, everyone. Be nice to each other. Cue music, please, man. Show.